So let's go through these arteries. We'll go through the arteries first as we go through it. I might throw in a vein here and there, but then we'll go to the vein list and rehash. All right, so I'm going to try to hit all these vessels on your list. I don't know if I'll hit them in exactly the same order as it's listed, but we'll get through them. Okay, so what I want to start with first is the aorta. And on this model here, you can see the aorta. This is the big long artery, the most important artery, and it's the artery that all the other systemic arteries come from. It starts from here, coming from the left ventricle, goes up, curves around, which is hard to see on this model here. If I remove that, curves around this way, and then goes down to where it splits here. The aorta is just one big long vessel, but because anatomists, being anatomists, have to name something a few different times, it has a few different regions that go by different names. So let's talk about the different regions. The first, I'll just take this out, right here, is what we call the ascending aorta. The ascending aorta is this part that goes up like this. Just that, it's real short. It'd be this part on this model. Then the ascending aorta curves around and it becomes this structure here. What part of the aorta is this referred to as?
Aortic arch.
Yeah, that's your aortic arch. And then once you come around the curve and the aorta starts going back down again, it's referred to as the descending aorta. The descending aorta goes through there all the way down to where it splits. Depending on where you are in the descending aorta, like what body cavity, the descending aorta also has a couple of different names. The part of the descending aorta that goes through the thoracic cavity is very creatively called the thoracic aorta. Yeah, you got it. Then this part here that goes through the abdominal cavity is very creatively called what?
The abdominal aorta.
Yeah, the abdominal aorta. So far, so good, right? Nothing too difficult. I want to point out the abdominal aorta gets a little funny when you look at it closely, because as soon as the aorta passes through this breathing muscle, that's the diaphragm. As soon as the aorta passes through that, it starts branching. And you can see a branch here, branch there, branches off to the side. The branches of the abdominal aorta can get tricky, but we're going to break it down. There are branches that occur right on the midline of the aorta that branch off front, like toward you in this direction. There are also branches where you have vessels going off to the sides here. I'm going to point to the ones that are front and center here in the midline of the aorta. This very first one up here is a branch we call the celiac trunk. The celiac trunk. Trunk means short. It's a short vessel, just like the pulmonary trunk we looked at last week was very short and then it branched and became other things. Same thing here. So the celiac trunk, as soon as it branches off of the aorta, it splits into 3 different vessels. One of these vessels goes off this way to the spleen, and it's called the splenic artery. You can't see the splenic artery very well on this model here or on most of the models. There's one model you can see the splenic artery pretty well on, and it's this big flatboard model. And I hate this flatboard model, except for 3 vessels, 2 of which go to the spleen. And those are these and these. Here's the splenic artery. You can see it branching off of the celiac trunk right there, splenic artery there, and right next to it is the blue one. What do you think that blue one is?
The splenic vein.
Yeah, splenic vein, easy peasy. All right, so that's one branch off of the celiac trunk. Then you've got another branch, this middle one here. This one is called the left gastric artery. If it were whole here and hadn't been cut away, you would see it would go off this way and would lead to your stomach. The gastric artery you can see on these models by looking at the stomach. So see the red line on the stomach, that's your gastric artery. On a practical, if we're going to ask you something like the splenic artery or the gastric artery, we wouldn't ask you right here because you can't see the full thing and it's not obvious. When we label these vessels on the practical, we're going to put the labels on obvious places where you'd definitely be able to identify without issue, okay? That's the intent anyway. Then, if you come back here to the celiac trunk, there is a third branch right here, And this branch goes over to your liver, and that is your common hepatic artery. Remember, I said for those liver arteries, always look at the liver. So anytime you see the term hepatic, think liver and go there. See the red vessels here? All the red things you see here represent the hepatic artery. So there's your hepatic artery. All right? Okay, so we have the celiac trunk, and it branches off into 3 directions. Then you've got these 2 other branches off of the abdominal aorta. These 2 are both mesenteric arteries. One is on the top, one is on the bottom, and they're named for being on the top or the bottom. So if this one here on the top is a mesenteric artery, which one do you think it is?
The superior.
You got it. Superior mesenteric, and then down here is your inferior mesenteric artery. There you go. So you've got your celiac trunk, letter C comes before M for mesenteric in the alphabet. All right, so we've got those, but then you also have the branches of the aorta that go off to the side. There are only a couple we want you to identify, and those include this branch here, these red things. They go to these organs. What are these organs?
The kidneys.
So what are these red vessels?
Renal arteries.
You got it, renal arteries. Perfect. By the way, notice sitting right next to the renal arteries are some blue guys. What are these?
Renal veins.
You got it, renal veins carrying blood out of the kidneys. Very good. All right, so we talked about these branches here of the abdominal aorta. While we're in this region, why don't we go ahead and talk about these things here? The abdominal aorta, when it stops, it branches and it becomes these vessels here. Notice where they're located. This is your pelvis. This is the iliac region of your pelvic bone. Therefore, these are your iliac arteries. These first ones are called common. These are the common iliac arteries. And then the common iliac arteries will branch. And I'm going to turn this a little bit this way, right here. And I'm not sure if you can see it, and if I'm in the way, I apologize. Here's your common iliac artery, but notice it branches. One branch goes in, one branch comes out. What do you call this one here that goes toward the outside?
Exterior.
Yeah, that's your external iliac artery. On a practical, if we ask you to identify a vessel, make sure you give the full name. So external iliac artery. Because if you just write iliac artery, we have a few of them. So which one are you referring to? So be specific there. Unless the question indicates left or right, I don't care if you write left or right. All right? Okay, so you have your external iliac artery, but then you've got this one that branches inward. So that would be your,
Internal.
you got it, internal iliac artery. Very good, very good. Since we're here, notice that right next to all those iliacs, you've got some blue vessels. What do you think this blue vessel is right here?
The iliac vein.
Yes. Common, internal, or external?
Common.
Common, good, because it sits right next to the common iliac artery. That makes this one the external iliac vein. And that makes, let's see, is it a good one in here? Sort of. You can barely see the internal iliac vein in there too. Everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right, so we've got those. Oh, I forgot to mention, here's another branch here of the abdominal aorta. See these arteries here that go down? They start like right up here. They're underneath the renal arteries. They start up here, they go all the way down this way, all the way down this way, and they go to this area of the body. They feed the testes and the ovaries. What do you think those arteries are?
Gonadal.
Yeah, gonadal arteries. And notice the blue vessel right next to them. Those would be the
Gonadal vein.
gonadal veins. Very good. All right, so we've got that portion here of the abdominal cavity done. Let's come back up this way, and we're going to look at some branches off of the aorta over here in the thoracic region. And actually, I'm going to use this model because you can see them really well right through here. Notice at the top of the aortic arch, you see 1, 2, 3 branches.
Mm-hmm.
These 3 branches occur, their names occur in alphabetical order from left to right. And there's a little trick to help you remember these. It's the ABCs of these aortic arch branches. A being the aorta, right here. B, this first branch is our brachiocephalic artery. And it goes up, if I follow this right here, it goes up this way, right there. That's the brachiocephalic. It's very short, and then it branches and becomes other things. This second branch here, which you can see is kind of like right there on this model. This is our left common carotid artery. So brachiocephalic is B, common carotid is C. Then, and this common carotid goes up this way. This is the left common carotid. We have a right common carotid, but it branches from a different location. All right, then we have this third branch off of the aortic arch, and this is what we call our left subclavian vein. So subclavian is S. So our ABCs, so ABCS, get it, ABCs? Right there. This subclavian vein, or artery rather, comes up this way and it goes underneath this bone. What is that bone?
Clavicle.
Yes, the clavicle. So this vessel is literally named the artery that goes under the clavicle. Sub means under, clavian is clavicle. So like subway is an underground train. By the way, my favorite Latin phrase of all time is ubi sub ubi. Do you know what that means? Where under where. All right. So we have these branches off of these this aorta. While we're here, let's go up this way. We saw the brachiocephalic right here. You saw the subclavians right here. You also saw the common carotid. This is also a common carotid artery. Notice up close to where the carotid enters into the skull, it branches. You can see the branches on each side. Right there and right there. This branch that goes to the outside actually comes out and covers the surface of the skull. That's the external carotid artery. Notice you can't see it very well. We would not ask that artery on this model because it's not obvious. All right? So again, we'll only label the obvious things. Now this other one here is our internal carotid artery. It actually goes up into the skull and goes into the interior portions of the brain, feeding the brain. So your internal carotid artery. Again, it's not necessarily obvious on this model, so we are not going to ask it on this. Remember, we're only going to label things that are obvious, okay? All right, so you've got your internal carotid there. Notice, since we're here, we'll look at some veins. This vein here sits right against the carotid artery. Do you guys know what vein this is?
The carotid vein.
That's a good guess. This is the one exception to the rule.
The jugular.
You got it. Yep, the jugular. The jugular vein. On your list of vessels to know, it has internal jugular and external jugular listed. I forgot to mention earlier, I do not care about internal or external. If you can identify this as just the jugular, I'm okay with that. Reason being is because this model and all of our models are totally wrong. In all reality, the internal jugular veins branch off of this vessel you see here and go this way. The external jugular veins branch off over here and go up. The models are wrong. So as long as you know this is a jugular, you're good, okay? So jugular vein right there. All right, let's see. I think I've got all of those arteries there of the torso. Let's start looking at, and let me make sure. Let me go through. Give me just a second. Yes. Yes. Yeah. Hooray. Hold on. Head and neck. I missed one. Okay, let's go to the brain. Here we go. Here's our brain here. I want to point out, see this thing that looks like a big old nasty centipede?
Yeah.
Right there? There are a couple of different vessels here to know. This one here and this one here. They join together. These are both vertebral arteries. They actually pass through your vertebral column. Remember when you learned about the vertebrae in AMP1 and they have these little holes? The cervical ones have holes off to the side. Remember transverse foramina? Those holes hold these vessels. So the vertebral arteries go up that way, and then at the base of the brain, they merge together, and it forms this like upside down V shape. So that's how I remember they're the vertebral. They have that upside down V shape. Where they merge together, see this thing? This is the body of our nasty centipede right here. This is a vessel called the basilar artery that's at the base of the brain. That's why it's called the basilar, base of the brain, right there. And the basilar artery will take you to the circle that goes around the pituitary gland. Do you remember what we call that circle?
Circle of Willis.
Circle of Willis, or we can call it the cerebral arterial circle. Either one on a practical is fine. Choose the one that is easiest for you to remember. All right, so now I think we've got that. Let's turn our attention to arms and legs. I'm going to put this down. There's only one other artery on this one, or vessel on this one, that I want to point out later. Otherwise, I hate that model. Okay, here we go. Let's take a look at the arm here. I'm going to hold it so that it's like down at your side, as you would be holding your arm down at your side. Notice this bone right here. What bone is that? The clavicle. So what do you think this vessel is under it?
The subclavicle?
Yeah, subclavian artery. So there's your subclavian artery. Now, which we already identified here, but now we're just seeing it at a different angle. If you follow the subclavian artery, it will branch. One branch goes into the armpit. What do you think that one is?
Axillary.
Axillary, yeah. So right there where my pinky is. I know it's hard to see. Right there. Right there. Can you guys see? That's the axillary artery. The other branch goes down the length of the arm. What do you think this artery is here?
The brachial.
You got it. That's the brachial artery right there. Then the brachial artery comes down and it branches and it goes to a few different places in the arm. Notice the vessel here that goes along this bone on the thumb side of the arm. What do you think that artery is? What is that artery?
The radial.
You got it. Radial artery. That makes this one on the other side the ulnar artery. You guys have got this. No problem, right? Mm-hmm. So far, so good. Notice on this model, you only see red vessels. We're not going to ask you, we're not going to ask you veins on this because there are no veins on this model. Okay? All right. I'm going to put this down. Let's go to the legs. Here we go. Oh. All right. Here's our leg. Starts up here. This is the pelvic cavity. Here's the ilium. So what do you think this blood vessel is right here? Let me show everybody. What do you think that is?
Iliac.
Yeah, which one?
Interior.
Hold on. I want to show you right where my finger is.
The common.
Okay. All right. So I've got some votes for common. People change their votes from external. What do you think? What do you think? What's your final answer?
Forgot about the common.
Common final answer? It's like how to be, what is it, millionaire or whatever? Common iliac artery. How did you know? For those that changed your answer, why did you change your answer?
Because it's before the branch.
That was before the branch. So there's your common. Good. That means that once it branches, you've got your external iliac artery here, your internal iliac artery here. Very good. Now, notice next to this external iliac is a blue vessel right there. What do you think that blue vessel represents?
The vein.
Yeah. External iliac vein. Good. Very good. So now, let's go back to our artery here. Our external iliac artery goes down through our leg and passes along this bone here. See the red structure there? Right there. What vessel, what artery do you think that is? You got it. It's the femoral or the femoral, potato. Okay. Very good. Right next to it is a blue vessel. So which one is that?
The vein.
Yeah, that's your femoral vein. Very good. I'm going to go back to the artery, coming down, and the artery is going to branch like around the knee area. One of the branches comes out here, out front along your shin bone. What do we call the shin bone?
The tibia.
The tibia. So see the red vessel here? I'm going to come around this way. See the red vessel here? What vessel do you think that is? What artery?
The tibial artery.
Anterior tibial artery. Okay, along that same train of thought, I'm going to flip it over. Here we go. Here's the vessel on the back side of that bone. right there, and it's red. What artery do you think that is?
Posterior tibial.
Posterior tibial artery.
Good.
There's only 2 vessels left on this leg model to look at. And those are the vessels, the red one here and the blue one here. Red and blue. Red and blue. And they pass through the backside of the knee. What do you call the backside of the knee? What's the anatomical?
Popliteal.
Yeah, the popliteal, right? So this red one would be your popliteal artery, and that makes the blue one what?
Popliteal vein.
Hey, you guys have mastered the vessels of the legs. How do you feel about these vessels so far? Okay, a little bit better. All right, I want to go through, I've gone through all the arteries. There are just a couple of veins I need to pick up. We identified several of them as we went through the arteries because they lie next to each other. But there are a couple that I want to make sure that we go through. One of them is a big one because we didn't talk about it when we talked about the aorta, and it's this, here and here. What are these?
The superior and inferior vena cava.
Yeah, superior vena cava, inferior vena cava. Right, you can see them here in the heart model. Superior, inferior. And we saw that last week. Good. Let's see, there were another couple, let's see, we identified renal. Here's one. You see it on this model. Take a look. See this vessel right here? It's coming from this gland. Do you remember what gland that is?
Adrenal.
It's the adrenal gland. This is called the adrenal vein. Sometimes, some textbooks, like your lab manual, call the adrenal vein the suprarenal vein. Supra means on top of. So this is the vein that goes to the thing that sits on top of the kidney. That's why it's called the suprarenal. So adrenal vein or suprarenal vein, they're the same thing, just different terms for the same structure. Then I also want to make sure to point out the hepatic stuff. Here we go. Veins of the liver. Anything, first of all, let's get the orientation here. Here's how the liver sits in the body, like this. See this big blue vessel here? That's actually your inferior vena cava. Do you see this big thing going into the inferior vena cava? This right here? Mm-hmm. And then I'm going to flip this over and all the other blue things you see right there. All of those blue things you see and that little thing going to the vena cava is your hepatic vein. So these are your hepatic veins. All the blue things you see here, except for this one because that's the inferior vena cava.
Okay.
We already identified the red things as the hepatic arteries. So the only vessel left to identify in the liver is going to be our special hepatic portal vein. Mm-hmm. And on our models, the hepatic portal vein is purple. So I always remember it because the portal is purple. So just think PP. Portal is purple. Purple portal, right here. It's this guy, right there. All the purple things you see are the hepatic portal vein. Do you remember what the function of the hepatic portal vein was again that I mentioned earlier? Yeah, it carries nutrients from the digestive tract to the liver. The reason it's important is because when we absorb all of our nutrients, when we eat our food, we also absorb toxins too. So by sending all of that fresh blood that's just absorbed everything from the food we eat to the liver first, the liver can detoxify our blood, can take out bacteria, can actually start processing nutrients too for the body before it goes anywhere else. And the liver is a really important organ, and we'll talk about that once we get to the digestive system. All right, I believe that there is just one last vein to talk about, and it's on this model I hate. This model is great for 3 things: the splenic vessels and a really big long vessel in your leg. It's called the great saphenous vessel. It sits on the back side of your leg. Look at this. Where my finger is, that thing. It goes from your hip all the way down to your heel. See this right here? That's the great saphenous vein. Great saphenous vein. You have one on each side, even though the model only shows it on the one side. the great saphenous vein. And that's the only place you'll see that vessel on any of our models. All right, I think we did it. How are you guys feeling?